The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across the solar system like seeds carried by the wind. They had built cities on Mars, mining stations on the moons of Jupiter, and research outposts as far as Neptune. They believed they understood the universe. They believed they were safe. Commander Lisa Drake sat alone in the control room of Deep Station 7, a small monitoring facility that orbited Neptune in the cold darkness of the outer solar system. She was a woman of 43 years, with gray streaks in her dark hair and tired lines around her eyes. She had spent 15 years watching the empty space beyond the planets, recording cosmic rays and tracking asteroids. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. That was about to change. The alarm started as a soft beep. Lisa looked up from her coffee and stared at the main screen. The numbers made no sense. Every sensor on the station was detecting the same thing at the same time, which should have been impossible. She put down her cup and walked closer to the display. "What are you?" she whispered to herself. The signal was coming from outside the solar system, from the direction of a star called Proxima Centauri. But it was not random noise or natural radiation. The pattern repeated itself every 37 seconds, perfect and precise. Someone or something was sending a message. Lisa called Dr. Kevin Moore, the station's language expert. Kevin was a quiet man who had spent his whole life studying patterns and codes. He arrived in the control room with messy hair and sleepy eyes, but when he saw the data, he became wide awake. "This is structured," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "This is deliberate communication." For 3 days and 3 nights, Kevin worked without rest. He filled notebooks with calculations and covered the walls with papers. Lisa brought him food that he forgot to eat and coffee that grew cold beside his keyboard. She watched him grow pale and thin, driven by something she did not fully understand. On the 4th morning, Kevin found her in the observation deck, staring out at the distant sun. "I cracked it," he said. Lisa turned to look at him. His face was gray with exhaustion, but there was something else in his expression: fear. "The message is simple," Kevin continued. "It uses basic mathematics that any intelligent species would recognize. Prime numbers, geometric ratios, universal constants." Once I understood the structure, the meaning was clear. He handed her a piece of paper. On it, he had written 3 sentences. "Leave, now. The silence comes. You have been warned." Lisa read the words 3 times. A cold feeling spread through her chest. "What does it mean?" she asked. "What is the silence?" "I don't know," Kevin admitted. "But whoever sent this was afraid. Very afraid." Lisa sent the message to Earth immediately. She expected panic. She expected emergency meetings and military alerts. Instead, she received a polite response from the United Earth Council, thanking her for her diligence and assuring her that experts would review the data. Weeks passed. The council decided that the signal was probably a natural phenomenon that had been misinterpreted. Some officials suggested it might be a prank from one of the outer colony stations. A few scientists argued that even if it was a real message, there was no reason to assume it was meant for humanity. Admiral Patricia Lane was the only person in power who took the warning seriously. She was an old woman with white hair and sharp eyes who had commanded warships for 40 years. She stood before the council and demanded action. "We have received a message from beyond our solar system," she said. "It tells us to leave. We do not know who sent it or why, but we would be fools to ignore it completely." The council voted against her. Humanity had worked too hard to build what they had. They would not abandon their colonies and run into the darkness. Because of a strange signal, Lisa watched the debates from her distant station and felt a growing sense of dread. She did not know what the silence was, but something in her heart told her it was real. 3 months later, a second signal arrived. It was stronger than the first, and the message had changed slightly. The silence approaches. Leave immediately. This is your final warning. The council discussed this new development for 2 days and decided to increase monitoring of the outer solar system. They built 3 new observation posts and assigned extra ships to patrol the edges of human territory. But they did not evacuate. They did not run. Kevin spent long hours analyzing both signals, searching for hidden information. He found something buried deep in the mathematical patterns, something that made his hands shake when he discovered it. "There's more here," he told Lisa. "The warning isn't just telling us to run. There's something else encoded in the structure. I don't understand it yet, but it's like... Like they hid a secret inside the message." "Who are they?" Lisa asked. "I don't know, but I think they wanted us to find this. I think they were hoping someone would look deeper." Before Kevin could finish his research, a third signal arrived. This one was different. The mathematical precision was gone, replaced by something that felt rushed and desperate. Too late. The silence comes. "We're sorry." And then nothing. The signal stopped completely. For several weeks, everything seemed normal. Ships traveled between the planets. Miners extracted resources from asteroids. And families lived their ordinary lives on a dozen different worlds. The warnings became old news, something people mentioned in jokes and forgot about. Lisa remained at her station, watching and waiting. She could not explain the feeling that gripped her, the certainty that something terrible was approaching. She started sleeping in the control room, afraid to miss anything important. Kevin continued his work on the hidden code, growing more obsessed with each passing day. He stopped talking to other people. He stopped eating regular meals. He simply worked, driven by a need to understand what was coming. On a cold Tuesday morning, Lisa detected something new. It was not a signal this time. It was an absence of signals. At the very edge of her sensors, stars were disappearing. She checked her equipment 3 times, certain that something was broken. But the readings were accurate. Points of light that had existed for billions of years were simply going dark, one after another, like candles being blown out by an invisible wind. The silence had arrived. Lisa sent an emergency message to Earth. This time, people listened, but it was already too late to run. The first reports came from the edge of the Oort cloud, where humanity kept its most distant outposts. These small stations floated in eternal darkness, manned by crews of 5 or 6 people who spent their days watching for threats from deep space. They were lonely places, but they were supposed to be safe. Station 14 stopped responding on a Monday. The crew had been sending regular reports every 6 hours, and then suddenly, there was nothing. No distress call. No explanation. Just silence. Earth assumed it was a technical problem. Equipment broke down all the time in the outer reaches of the solar system. They sent a repair ship to investigate. That ship never came back. 2 more stations went dark over the following week. Then a mining colony on a distant asteroid stopped all communication. Then a research vessel that had been studying comets disappeared from every tracking system. Captain Daniel Perry commanded a patrol ship called the Resolute. He was a practical man who did not believe in mysteries. When his superiors ordered him to investigate the disappearances, he gathered his crew of 12 and flew toward the edge of human space, expecting to find broken equipment or perhaps a radiation storm that had damaged communication systems. What he found was something his mind struggled to accept. The Resolute approached the last known position of Station 14. Perry stood on the bridge, watching the darkness through the main viewport. His sensors showed nothing ahead. Not empty space. Nothing. The instruments could not even detect the vacuum. "What am I looking at?" he asked his science officer, a young woman named Grace Chen. Grace studied her readings with growing confusion. "Sir, I don't understand this. There's no electromagnetic radiation coming from that region. No heat, no light, not even cosmic background radiation. It's like space itself has stopped existing." Perry ordered the ship to move closer. As they approached, he saw it clearly for the first time. There was a boundary ahead, a wall where the stars simply ended. On one side, normal space continued with its scattered points of light. On the other side, there was absolute darkness, deeper than anything Perry had ever imagined. "Record everything," he ordered. "Send continuous transmission to Earth. They need to see this." The Resolute maintained its position and watched. Over the next hour, Perry and his crew witnessed something that would change humanity forever. A small mining station drifted into view, tumbling slowly toward the boundary. Perry tried to send a warning, but there was no response. The station was abandoned or already dead. When the station touched the darkness, it did not explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, solid and real. The next moment it was gone, erased as if it had never been. The boundary swallowed it without sound or light. "Get us out of here," Perry whispered. The Resolute turned and fled at maximum speed. Behind them, the boundary continued to advance, consuming everything in its path. Perry's transmission reached Earth 3 hours later. By then, the silence had already swallowed 2 more. Outpost Dr. Samantha Cole watched the footage from her laboratory on the moon. She was a physicist who had spent her career studying the fundamental nature of reality. What she saw on the screen made her theories seem like children's games. "It's not destroying matter," she said to her colleagues. "Look at the readings. There's no energy release, no debris, no radiation. The station didn't break apart. It was unmade. Whatever this phenomenon is, it's removing things from existence entirely." Her colleague, Dr. Nathan Brooks, leaned forward with intense interest. He was a thin man with wild gray hair who had spent 30 years being ignored by the scientific community. His theories about the structure of reality were considered too strange, too impossible. Now those theories seemed terrifyingly relevant. "If I'm right," he said slowly, "this isn't a natural phenomenon. This is a weapon. Someone built this." "Built what?" Samantha asked. "How do you build something that erases reality?" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." On Earth, panic spread like fire through dry grass. News of the silence reached every city and colony within days. Religious leaders declared that the end times had arrived. Governments struggled to maintain order as millions of people demanded answers that no one could provide. The United Earth Council met in emergency session. Admiral Patricia Lane, who had warned them months ago, stood before the assembled leaders with cold fury in her eyes. "I told you to take this seriously," she said. "I told you the warnings were real. Now we have perhaps 6 months before that thing reaches Earth. What is your plan?" The council had no plan. Some members suggested evacuation, but evacuation to where? The silence was expanding in all directions. Running would only delay the inevitable. Others proposed sending weapons against the boundary, nuclear missiles and energy beams that might stop or slow its advance. Admiral Lane authorized these attacks, knowing they would probably fail. She was right. Every weapon humanity possessed passed through the boundary and vanished. The silence did not slow. It did not notice. Meanwhile, Dr. Nathan Brooks locked himself in his laboratory and began the most important work of his life. He studied every piece of data from Captain Perry's transmission. He analyzed the original warning signals that Kevin Moore had decoded. He searched for any clue that might explain what the silence was and how it could be stopped. On the 3rd night of his research, he found something extraordinary. The warning signals contained hidden information, just as Kevin had suspected. Buried beneath this simple message was a complex mathematical structure that seemed to describe the silence itself. They didn't just warn us, Nathan realized. They told us how it works. They gave us the key. He worked without sleep, decoding layer after layer of hidden information. The silence, he learned, was ancient beyond imagination. It had been created billions of years ago by beings who feared the growth of organic life. They believed that intelligent species would eventually threaten the stability of the universe itself. So they built a weapon to prevent that future. The silence had been sweeping across the galaxy ever since, erasing every civilization it encountered. Most species received the warning and fled, scattering to distant stars in hope of survival. None of them tried to fight. None of them thought fighting was possible. But the beings who sent the warning had hidden something else in their message. A solution. A way to stop the silence permanently. They had encoded this. Knowledge in mathematical patterns that only a determined species would find. Nathan Brooks stared at his calculations and felt hopeful. The first time since the crisis began. "We can beat this," he whispered. "We just need to be brave enough to try." He gathered his notes and prepared to share his discovery with the world. Humanity's darkest hour had arrived, but Nathan Brooks believed that darkness could be defeated. The question was whether humanity would have the courage to fight. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that officially did not exist, humanity's greatest minds gathered to hear Dr. Nathan Brooks explain his discovery. The room was cold and gray, filled with military officers, government leaders, and scientists who had been pulled from their work across the solar system. General Maria Santos stood at the back of the room, watching with careful eyes. She was a woman of 55 years, with short black hair and a face that rarely showed emotion. 3 days ago, she had been appointed to lead Earth's defense against the silence. It was a job that most people believed was impossible. Nathan Brooks walked to the front of the room and activated a holographic display. Numbers and diagrams filled the air around him. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know many of you think this meeting is pointless. The silence cannot be stopped. We should spend our final months saying goodbye to our loved ones." He paused. "I am here to tell you that you are wrong." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several people shook their heads in disbelief. Nathan continued. "For 30 years, I have studied the fundamental structure of reality. Most of my colleagues thought my work was foolish. They said I was chasing impossible ideas. But my research has led me to understand something crucial about what we are facing." He pointed to the display, which showed a simplified image of the silence-consuming space. "This phenomenon is not natural. It is a weapon built billions of years ago by an ancient civilization. They feared that intelligent life would eventually grow too powerful, so they created the silence to prevent that future. It has been expanding across the galaxy ever since, erasing every species it encounters." An admiral in the front row raised his hand. "If it has existed for billions of years and destroyed countless civilizations, what makes you think we can stop it?" "Because no one has ever tried," Nathan answered simply. "Every species that received the warning did exactly what they were told. They ran, they scattered, they hid, and eventually, the silence found them all." He changed the display to show the decoded warning signals. The beings who sent these warnings were different. They knew running was pointless. So they did something remarkable. They hid the solution inside the warning itself. The room fell completely silent. "The mathematical patterns in these signals describe how the silence works," Nathan explained. "It erases matter by disrupting the fundamental constants of the universe. In simple terms, it convinces reality that certain things were never real to begin with." General Santos stepped forward. "Can you stop it?" "I believe so. The signals describe a device that can reinforce the fundamental constants, creating a field where the silence cannot function. Within this field, reality becomes stable and permanent. The silence cannot unmake anything. Then build the device, Santos ordered. It is not that simple. Nathan's expression grew serious. The device requires enormous amounts of energy. More energy than humanity has ever produced. More energy than all our power plants and reactors combined. Silence filled the room. The hope that had begun to grow faded quickly. Then a young voice spoke from the side of the room. "What about the sun?" Everyone turned to look at Lieutenant Commander Jake Ellis. He was a young man of 32 years, with a reputation for creative thinking and dangerous ideas. "The sun produces more energy in 1 second than humanity uses in 1,000,000 years, Jake continued. "If we could harness even a fraction of that power, would it be enough?" Nathan stared at him for a long moment. "Theoretically, yes. But how would we capture solar energy on that scale?" Jake walked to the display and began sketching with his finger. "We don't capture it. We direct it." A controlled solar flare aimed through the device at the exact right moment. The energy would project the reality field outward, pushing back against the silence. That would require flying directly into the silence, General Santos observed. "The ships would be destroyed." "Yes," Jake admitted. "They would." The room erupted in argument. Some people called the plan suicide. Others said it was their only hope. Nathan Brooks stood quietly, running calculations in his head. "It could work," he finally said. "The physics are sound. But we would need a fleet of ships carrying the device, and we would need volunteers willing to fly into certain death." "Then we ask for volunteers," General Santos said firmly. "And we build the device." Over the following weeks, humanity came together in a way that had never happened before in its history. Factories on Earth, Mars, and the Moon worked day and night. Scientists who had spent their careers competing with each other now shared their knowledge freely. Ordinary people donated their time and resources to the construction effort. The device was called the Anchor. It was a massive structure that took the form of a ring, designed to be carried at the center of a fleet of ships. When activated with sufficient energy, it would project a field that reinforced reality itself. Dr. Samantha Cole led the team that built the Anchor's core. She worked 20 hours a day, sleeping only when her body forced her to stop. She had lost friends to the advancing silence, watched their stations wink out of existence on her screens. The memory drove her forward. Dr. Amy Grant, Nathan's closest colleague, designed the energy systems that would channel the solar flare. She was a quiet woman who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. Her calculations were perfect, her engineering flawless. Meanwhile, Kevin Moore continued his work on the warning signals, searching for any additional information that might help. He had grown thin and pale, his eyes red from endless hours of staring at screens. But he refused to stop. "There's more here," he told Lisa Drake during a video call. "I can feel it. They hid something else in the signal. I just need to find it." Lisa was now stationed on Mars, helping to coordinate the construction effort. She had not slept properly since the crisis began, but she made time to talk with Kevin every day, worried about his health and his sanity. "Take care of yourself," she told him. "We need you alive." "I'll rest when this is over," he promised. One way or another, volunteers for the final mission came forward by the thousands. Young and old, soldiers and civilians, people from every colony and nation. They understood what they were being asked to do. They understood they would not survive. They volunteered anyway. General Santos personally reviewed every application. She selected 50 ships and 200 crew members, choosing people with the skills and courage needed for the mission. Commander Lisa Drake submitted her own application on the final day. Santos called her immediately. "You were the first to detect the warning," the general said. "You should stay safe, record what happens, tell the story if we succeed." "With respect, General, I was the first to see this thing coming. I should be the first to fight it." Santos studied her face through the screen for a long moment. Then she nodded. "You'll command the lead ship. Don't make me regret this decision." Lisa smiled grimly. "I won't." The fleet assembled near the sun, their ships arranged in precise formation around the anchor. Behind them, Earth glowed blue and green, beautiful and fragile. Ahead of them, the darkness waited. Humanity had made its choice. They would not run. They would not hide. They would fight. The fleet gathered in the shadow of Mercury, 50 ships arranged in a perfect circle around the massive ring of the anchor. Commander Lisa Drake sat in the captain's chair of the lead vessel, a ship called the Dawn. She looked out at the other ships through her viewport, knowing that most of them would not return from this mission. General Maria Santos appeared on the main screen, her face serious but calm. She was speaking from the command center on the moon, where she would coordinate the mission from a distance. "You all know why you're here," Santos began. "You know what we're asking you to do. Every person in this fleet volunteered, knowing the risks. I wish I could tell you that everyone will survive. I cannot, but I can tell you this. What you do today will determine the future of our species. If you succeed, humanity lives. If you fail, we join every other civilization that the silence has erased." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "I have commanded soldiers for 30 years. I have never been more proud than I am right now. Go with courage. Go with hope. And know that every human being in the solar system is watching you with gratitude in their hearts." The screen went dark. Lisa took a deep breath and activated the fleet communication channel. "All ships. This is Commander Drake. Begin approach sequence." The fleet moved forward, flying past Mercury toward the sun. The heat increased steadily as they approached, but their ships were designed to withstand extreme temperatures. They had been modified specifically for this mission, with additional shielding and cooling systems. Behind them, on Earth and Mars and a dozen moons, billions of people watched the mission unfold on their screens. Families gathered together. Strangers held hands. Prayers were spoken in 100 different languages. Lieutenant Commander Jake Ellis monitored the solar activity from his station aboard the Dawn. He was responsible for triggering the controlled flare at exactly the right moment. Too early, and the energy would dissipate before reaching the anchor. Too late, and the fleet would be destroyed before they could activate the device. "Solar conditions are stable," he reported. "We'll have a 12-second window for activation." "Understood," Lisa replied. All ships maintain formation. The journey to the edge of the silence took 4 hours. As they traveled, the crew members wrote final messages to their families, recorded videos for children they would never see grow up, and made peace with their choices. Some cried quietly at their stations. Others laughed and told jokes, refusing to let fear control their final hours. Dr. Amy Grant worked in the engineering section, making final adjustments to the energy systems. She had insisted on joining the mission personally, arguing that no one else understood the technology as well as she did. Nathan Brooks had tried to convince her to stay, but she had refused. "If this doesn't work, I don't want to be alive to see the end," she told him. "And if it does work, someone needs to be there to fix any problems." Nathan remained on Earth, monitoring the mission from his laboratory. He felt helpless watching from such a distance, but his work was done. The fate of humanity now rested in the hands of the fleet. The silence appeared on their sensors, 2 hours before they could see it with their eyes. It was a wall of absolute darkness, advancing slowly but steadily toward the inner solar system. The fleet adjusted its course to intercept, When they finally saw it through their viewports, several crew members gasped in horror. The descriptions and recordings had not prepared them for the reality. The silence was not simply dark. It was empty in a way that made the human mind want to look away. Staring at it felt like staring at death itself. "Stay focused," Lisa commanded. "We have a job to do." The fleet flew closer. Behind the wall of nothingness, there were no stars, no light, no sign that anything had ever existed. The boundary between reality and the silence was sharp and clear, a line where the universe simply stopped. "Beginning final approach," Lisa announced. "All ships, prepare for energy transfer." The fleet arranged itself into the precise formation they had practiced hundreds of times. The anchor sat at the center, its ring structure glowing faintly with contained power. The 50 ships surrounded it, each one connected by invisible beams of energy. "Distance to boundary, 1 million kilometers," the navigator reported. Lisa opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is our moment." Every species that came before us ran from this thing. They were told to flee, and they obeyed. We're different. We don't run. We don't hide. We stand and fight. 500,000 kilometers. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, know that you are the bravest humans who ever lived. Your names will be remembered forever. Your sacrifice will give our children a future. 200,000 kilometers. Jake Ellis watched his instruments with intense concentration. The solar activity was building exactly as planned. He had programmed the sequence weeks ago, but he would need to trigger it manually at the precise moment. 100,000 kilometers. The boundary of the silence filled their viewports now. A wall of darkness that seemed to go on forever in every direction. Some crew members closed their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, refusing to look away. 50,000 kilometers. Lisa's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Her heart pounded in her chest. She thought of her family on Earth, her parents who had raised her to be brave, her sister who had cried when she volunteered for this mission. 20,000 kilometers. Entering the activation zone. "Jake," Lisa said quietly. Now, Jake pressed the button that triggered the solar flare. Millions of kilometers behind them, the sun erupted. A massive burst of energy tore through space, guided by the satellites they had positioned along the route. The energy hit the anchor and flowed through its structure, building and building until the ring blazed with light brighter than anything the crew had ever seen. "Anchor is at full power," Amy reported from engineering. "Projecting field in 3, 2, 1. The reality field exploded outward from the anchor. It was invisible to the eye, but the instruments showed it clearly. A sphere of reinforced existence, expanding at the speed of light, pushing against the boundary of the silence. And then the fleet crossed into the darkness. For 17 minutes, there was nothing. The ships vanished from every sensor on Earth and Mars. Communication cut off completely. Billions of people watched their screens and saw only static. Some people began to cry. Others turned away, unable to watch. Religious leaders called for prayers. Children asked their parents what was happening. No one had answers. General Santos stood in the command center, her face like stone. She had sent 200 people to their deaths. She had gambled the future of humanity on a theory and a prayer. If the mission failed, she would spend her remaining months knowing she had made the wrong choice. "Come on," she whispered. "Come back to us." Then the static cleared. The sensors came back online. The darkness that had covered the outer solar system was changing. It was pulling back, retreating, shrinking. The boundary that advanced for months was now moving in the opposite direction. "It's working," someone shouted. "The silence is reversing." Santos leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. "What about the fleet?" The communications officer worked frantically at his station. "I'm getting signals." Multiple ships. They're alive. They're coming back. A cheer erupted in the command center. People hugged each other and laughed and cried. Santos allowed herself a small smile on the dawn. Lisa Drake opened her eyes and looked out at the stars that had reappeared around them. The silence was gone, pushed back by the reality field they had created. Space looked normal again. "Damage report," she requested. "We lost 7 ships during the transition," her first officer replied quietly. 43 survived. Lisa closed her eyes and said a silent prayer for the ones who had not made it. 53 people had given their lives for this victory. "Set course for Earth," she ordered. "Let's go home." The fleet emerged from where the silence had been, their ships battered but whole. Commander Lisa Drake stood on the bridge of the dawn and watched as stars reappeared in the distance. Points of light flickering back into existence like candles being lit in a dark room. Dr. Samantha Cole stared at her instruments on the lunar base, tears streaming down her face. The reading showed something she had never expected to see. The silence was not just retreating. It was being undone. Space that had been erased was restoring itself, matter and energy returning as if they had never been gone. "The reality field is spreading," she reported to General Santos. "It's not just protecting our solar system. It's pushing outward, reversing the damage throughout the galaxy." Santos closed her eyes and let out a breath she had been holding for months. "How is that possible?" "The anchor must have done more than we planned," Samantha explained. "It didn't just create a defensive barrier. It created a wave that reinforces reality wherever it goes. The silence cannot exist in contact with this field. Everywhere the wave touches, existence becomes permanent again." The news spread across Earth within hours. People poured into the streets, celebrating and weeping and holding each other. The threat that had seemed unstoppable, the ancient weapon that had erased countless civilizations, had been defeated by a single species that refused to run. Lisa Drake's voice came through every speaker on the planet. "The silence is broken. We're coming home." The fleet's return to Earth became the largest celebration in human history. Millions of people gathered to watch the ships descend through the atmosphere. The 43 surviving vessels landed one by one, their crews emerging to cheers and tears and embraces from families who had expected to never see them again. Lisa was the last to leave her ship. She walked down the ramp and found her sister waiting, along with her elderly parents who had traveled from their home in Colorado. They held each other for a long time, not speaking, simply grateful to be together. General Santos met privately with Lisa the next day. They sat in a quiet office overlooking the city, watching the continued celebrations in the streets below. 53 people, Lisa said quietly. "That's the price we paid." "And they saved $8 billion, Santos replied. "Plus everyone who will be born in the future." Their sacrifice was not small, but neither was what they accomplished. A week later, something unexpected happened. Communication arrays across the solar system detected new signals, hundreds of them, coming from every direction in the galaxy. These were not warnings. They were messages. Dr. Kevin Moore, finally rested after months of exhaustion, worked to decode the first transmission. What he found made him laugh with joy. "Their greetings," he told the assembled leaders of Earth. Hundreds of different species, all sending the same basic message. They watched what we did. They saw us fight the silence. And they want to talk to us. The messages told stories that humanity had never imagined. Across the galaxy, civilizations had hidden for millions of years, running from the silence, shrinking themselves to avoid detection, abandoning entire worlds to survive a little longer. They had believed the silence was inevitable, an unstoppable force that would eventually consume everything. None of them had thought to fight back. The very idea seemed impossible. When you received the warning, you ran. That was the rule. That was what everyone did. Until humanity. We watched you, one message said. We saw your tiny fleet fly into the darkness. We expected you to be erased like all the others. Instead, you did what no species has ever done. You turned the silence back. You broke the weapon that has haunted us for eons. Another message was more personal. We hid in the shadows of a dying star, waiting for the end. Now we see light returning to parts of the galaxy that have been dark for millions of years. You gave us hope. You gave us a future. Nathan Brooks read through dozens of decoded messages, his theories finally validated in the most dramatic way possible. The beings who had sent the original warning had hoped someone would find the hidden solution. They had been waiting, watching, for a species brave enough to try. They planted the seed, Nathan explained to the United Earth Council. They couldn't fight the silence themselves. Their civilization was already dying when they sent the warning. But they encoded everything we needed, hoping that someday, somehow, a species would be stubborn enough to look for it. Why us? Someone asked. Why did we succeed when everyone else failed? Nathan smiled. I've thought about that a lot. I think it's because of who we are. Humanity has always been difficult. We don't follow rules well. When someone tells us something is impossible, we take it as a challenge. General Santos nodded slowly. Every other species heard the warning and obeyed. We heard the warning and got angry. In the months that followed, humanity established contact with species across the galaxy. Ships began arriving in the solar system, carrying beings of every shape and size, all wanting to meet the civilization that had broken the silence. Some came seeking alliance. Others came seeking knowledge. A few came simply to see humans with their own eyes, to understand how such a young and small species had accomplished what ancient civilizations could not. Lisa Drake was chosen to lead Earth's first diplomatic mission to another world. She traveled to a planet called Haven, where survivors of 100 different species had gathered during the dark years. They welcomed her as a hero, though she insisted she was just one of many who had made the victory possible. Tell us your secret, the leader of Haven asked her. How did you find the courage to fight? Lisa thought about the question for a long time. She remembered Kevin's sleepless nights decoding the signals. She remembered Nathan's determination to find a solution. She remembered Jake's brilliant idea about the solar flare, Amy's perfect engineering, the volunteers who had known they would die and came anyway. We didn't have a secret, she finally answered. We just refused to accept that we couldn't win. Someone told us to give up and run. We decided to prove them wrong instead. The story of humanity's stand against the silence spread across the galaxy. It became a legend, told by species who had never seen Earth, passed down through generations who would never meet a human. The message was simple but powerful. The universe was not helpless. Threats could be defeated. Hope was always possible. Back on Earth, Nathan Brooks spent his final years writing the complete story of how the silence was broken. He wanted future generations to understand not just what had happened, but why. The solution had always existed, hidden in the warning signals. What humanity contributed was the courage to look for it. We were not the smartest species in the galaxy, he wrote. We were not the oldest or the most advanced. But we were the ones who refused to surrender. And in the end, that made all the difference. Commander Lisa Drake retired to a small house by the ocean where she could watch the stars at night. Sometimes visitors came to ask her about the mission, to hear the story from someone who had been there. She always told them the same thing. The universe warned us to run. We ignored that warning. And because we did, the stars are shining again. Across the galaxy, in places that have been dark for millions of years, light was returning. Civilizations that had hidden were emerging. Species that had feared extinction were rebuilding. And at the center of it all, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary star, humanity continued to be exactly what it had always been: stubborn, defiant, unwilling to accept defeat. The universe had given its final warning. Humanity had answered with a single word. No. And the stars would never be silent again.